The Vietnamese monk, mystic, scholar, and activist Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, in which he explored the crossroads of compassion and holiness at which the two traditions meet. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about the importance of community, comparing the community of the Christian church with the Buddhist Sangha, and he says, in Christianity, the church is the crown of the path of practice, the true teaching authority. It is often said that there is no salvation outside the church. In Buddhism, a Sangha is a group of monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen who practice together to encourage the best qualities in each other. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, Jesus said, "Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am." In Buddhism, it takes at least 4 persons practicing together to be called a Sangha. That allows Sangha karma, the legal procedure for making decisions in the community life, to be possible. When we live as a Sangha, we regard each other as brothers and sisters, and we practice the 6 concords. 1, sharing space. 2, sharing the essentials of daily life. 3, observing the same precepts. 4, using only words that contribute to harmony. 5, sharing our insights and understanding. And 6, respecting each other's viewpoints. A community that follows these principles always lives happily and at peace. When we gather together to form a Sangha, we practice opening up to the confines of our separate self and become a large body of love and understanding. We and our brothers and sisters are one. This idea of salvation is echoed in the Eastern Orthodox Church, which has even more a sense of togetherness. You can only be saved as a community. Today, this community welcomes Mr. Bryan Wade to our pulpit. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good morning, Gettysburg. I'm privileged and thankful to be here. And as I was looking over the program, as they emailed it to me, I said, wow, they sort of really beautifully contextualized the theme of love in a way that I hadn't seen before in a church service. So thank you so much, because it's not that it's a job, but it's just raised my spirit to. I've already been embedded with a lot of love, singing, things of that regard. So thank you so much. I wanted to start off by saying, not only does my documentary series, Keystones, highlight the African American experience, but probably 2 years in, we decided that we wanted to expand our scope in a loving way to include the histories, or the oral histories, of ethnic minority groups, the LGBTQ experience. It's on our website, so I wanted that to be front and center, because I said, I realize the history of the African American experience in America has been marginalized, but so have the Native American experiences and a lot of experiences. Even, if you look at the Irish, when they first got here, or other groups. So I went to the board and said, look, I know we haven't been able to produce documentaries to that extent yet, but at least I wanted that energy to be out there, that we're not only exclusively looking at our own experience, but we're looking at the human experience in a very holistic way. So I just needed to say that, because sometimes we can get caught up in our own pain or our own misery, but it's a human experience, and all humans have had different tragedies, different experiences. One constant is that if we can continue to practice love in our own ways, where we're uplifting people and not putting them down, and learning to respect people. That was one of the reasons I had created a television series around race. Matter of fact, there's like 125 of those programs still online. But part of my concern was that when we look at the legacy of race in America or the world, some say, use the term ethnocentrism, that it's a social construct. That means it was created. It's not real, it's not scientific, where we use terms like black blood and white blood and all those types of things. And the premise for Worlds Apart was to deconstruct a lot of that misinformation. So I had opportunities to go to Stanford, Harvard, different places, meet with geneticists, anthropologists that would talk about those kinds of things. But yet, a conclusion I came to, unfortunately, America and the world collectively doesn't have the collective will to deconstruct a lot of that misinformation. And I know it has to start with each one of us in terms of how we interact. And one thing I can say about the service, I felt nothing but love throughout the whole service. You know, it's been a while where I was in an environment, a church environment, not nice services, but I really felt that. And I'm not just saying that, but it was just so thematically tied together. And I wanted to thank Mr. Shope and a lot of the others that made that possible. Thank you so much. As you're aware, in the program, my 15 minutes, I'll be mindful of that. And I think now I can just sit down because it's already been spoken in the service, right? No. No, I won't do that. But it's going to be dealing with the topic of love. You know, there's saying sometimes, there was this song, I was thinking about Dionne Warwick, for those who can remember Dionne Warwick, that song called The Look of Love. Anybody remember that song? You know, now as a kid, I'm thinking, the look of love, how does love look? You know, what does it look like? You know, you're talking about just looking at a person. Now I'm looking through the eyes of a child because I was a kid when that came out. But that resonated with me as I thought about what I was going to say today. And I wanted to say, you know, love is more than just looks. You know, there's this saying called all that glitters not gold. And I'm sure you might know anybody know another saying that, you know, we use as a catchphrase around love, but I'm sure there are a lot of them. But I wanted just to take this time to, I highlighted that scripture in John where it says, by this, everyone, I know some say men, but I like the term everyone, will know that you are my disciples. Now, I know this comes out of the Christian tradition, but as I look at a lot of the other traditions, Buddhists, and a lot of it, love is a thematic theme that runs through all of them. So it's not to be exclusive at all. I just come out of a Christian tradition. That was my upbringing, but now having a more expansive view of the world, I realize that love is not limited to a particular religious entity or organization. Love is universal. And as we can practice this love, not only in our words, but in our actions, and that's really my focus. Someone today, it was a compliment, and they said, well, maybe sometime you'll win this Golden Globe Award for what you're doing. I said, I could care less about Golden Globes. I wish if there was anything I could do, is that this would bring about world peace. Keep the awards, just bring peace on this earth. And we have to be responsible for making that happen, regardless of our status in life. You know, we get caught up in class sometimes, you know, where, oh, I have this and I have that, and we have these hierarchies. In India, they call it a caste, but we have it here in the United States too, and a lot of it divides us based on what we have. But if we claim to be higher spiritual beings in terms of our relationship with each other, we have to transcend those kinds of barriers. And when we're able to do that, you'll see differences in people's lives. As a sister talked about, she saw a homeless person in the street. Harrisburg, they have a whole enclave over there by the Department of Motor Vehicles. I mean, it must be hundreds of people back in the wooded area. And I just happened to film it, you know, just driving by. Next thing you know, a lot of help is being, you know, sent their way. But with all the wealth in the world, no one should be hungry. No one should be homeless. And that's not to castigate anyone here. It's just as I see the suffering and the pain. I remember when God called me into the ministry, I was like 9 or 10 in my way as a child. And it was during the height of the Vietnam War. And I said, wow, you know, growing up a kid, you know, they said, love one another, but yet you see Walter Cronkite talking about the Vietnam War. For those who remember Walter Cronkite, he was a journalist. I got a mixed audience here. Say, Walter Cronkite, who's he? But it just laid my heart about what could I do. And, you know, growing up in the church, you know, I'm thinking, well, maybe I should be a minister. But it was really about that sense of caring for others beyond just a title of being called a minister. And you don't necessarily need a title to do that. We can do that in our own ways every day. You know, I'm getting off my text here, and it's just like I'm just being led to what's coming into my spirit. But let me get back to this. One of my points is love as a definition is action. It goes beyond just looks. And it's already been said here in the service today about love is an action. The verse emphasizes that love is just not an abstract concept, but a tangible expression of care. Not what you say, which can be helpful because words are powerful, but what you do in a holistic way. Our words coupled with our actions. Defining love as an action indicates responsibility because unlike our feelings, and feelings can come and go, they can change 1 minute, our actions are entirely in our control. Love is not simple chemicals in the brain, but rather a choice made with our intentions. We have to be intentional. They can't hear me or something, or I'm not talking loud enough?
Our friends at Zoom.
Oh, okay. Okay, out there in Zoom land, I'm sorry. Okay, defining love as an action indicates responsibility because unlike our feelings, our actions entirely are in our control. Love is not simple chemicals in our brain, but rather choices made with our intentions. Love is a way of life, according to some Bibles or other holy books or traditions. The verse implies that disciples should embody followers, disciples. Sometimes in some ways, disciple is corollary to discipline, a structured path or a student or a learner. Making it a way of life. Love is a way of life. Relationships experts, Gary Chapman, I don't know if you remember the book called Love Languages. He did a complete sort of overview about how people need to be loved, in terms of what's their primary, secondary, third love languages. And he says the following: shows how genuine love can direct your interactions with other people, leading to positive change in their lives and yours. You'll learn how the 7 traits of love, kindness, patience, forgiveness, courtesy, humility, generosity, and honesty work together to transform your approach to everyday encounters with others. Somebody mentioned today that love is a unifying force. I started to go into Einstein. I said, better not do that, as far as the force of energy and love. The verse suggests that love will foster unity, harmony within a community of believers. And again, that transcends a particular denomination. If you have love in a universal sense, people recognize that regardless to the traditions. They recognize love. They recognize hate. If you want our species to survive, if we are to find meaning in life, if we want to save the world, the earth, I always get stuck on the term world, means order and arrangement versus the physical entity, the earth. They're two different things. I know sometimes people sort of conjoin them together. If we want our species to survive, if we find meaning in life, we want to save the world and every sentient being in its inhabitants. Love is the one and only answer. The Beatles said, remember the song? Who remembers the song? What did the Beatles say? All you need is love. Wah, 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 wah. I think of Charlie Brown when they go, wonk, 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 wonk. Oh, my goodness. Here he goes ad-libbing. I got to stay focused now. If we want our species to survive, we must exercise love one to the other. And sometimes you may not feel like it all the time. You may not. You may be afraid sometimes. Love isn't just something that, this is going to be so easy. Love requires a lot of these traits, and it isn't always easy. Sometimes you may have been offended by someone or hurt deeply, and you want to lash out. Guilty as charged. But at times we have to continue to, you may not get it right the first time, but we always have the opportunity to continue to grow as individuals. We all don't have it. We all haven't arrived where we just do everything we're supposed to do. But love can be that. And again, they talk about you reap what you sow. As you give, you receive. The more you give love, the more you receive it. I can speak to it myself. There's another gentleman that I wanted to briefly mention. His name is Michael Emerson, who wrote a book called Divided by Faith. He was on my television series years ago. Look it up, look the book up. It was him and David Smith. Michael Emerson was at Rice when I met him years ago, and David Smith was at Notre Dame, and they wrote a book that was talking about the state of the church relative to the issues of love and how the church being pulled in. Now, it was in the context of the Christian church, and let me be very clear. How that the church is being pulled in so many directions politically. You know, they talked about Christian nationalism, a lot of other things. But they wanted people to focus on why is the church so divided? Why is it divided by color? Why is it divided by gender? Why is it divided by politics? Why is it divided by money? If we hold these tenets to be true for this man who will know that you are my disciples, why are yet we're so divided? And we're supposed to be that uniting force, a uniting force. Again, there are other traditions, so I want to be very clear about that. I realized, because when I started doing a little research, I said, oh my goodness. And it was nice, it was just a beautiful tapestry about your tenets in the Universalist Unitarian Church. And I said, wow, so I said, be mindful not to focus so much on Christianity. You have others out here doing some great things. And so in the book, Divided by Faith, they basically did surveys asking people, why is the church so divided? Why is it divided on all these kinds of lines? In fact, the most, and again, I use the term white evangelicals, see no systemic discrimination against blacks. And it's talking specifically about racism in American society. Instead, it is an evangelical movement emphasizing on individualism, free will, and personal relationships that make indivisible the persuasive injustices that perpetuate racial inequality. Most racial problems, the subject told by the authors, can be solved by repentance and conversion of the sinful individual's faults. And that takes some probing, because sometimes, you know, I know they say that racism is a learned behavior. You know, people aren't just born that way. It's just a taught behavior. I don't know if you remember the teacher, I forgot her name. She did that experiment, brown eye, blue eyes. I forgot her name that quick. And she taught, and she shows that in the classroom. Years ago she did this, and she's still talking, lecturing today, about how a lot of these behaviors are learned by children. Well, how would they know this when you say, okay, you're the brown eyes today, and you're the smart ones. You're the blue eyes, and you're not so smart. And then the kids started, just because she made that statement, they started saying, oh, you're not as smart as we're, and how that made children feel. So these kinds of behaviors, if you can teach negative kinds of things, why not be as responsible to practice love? If that kind of negative qualities can bring about that kind of behavior, what do you think love can do? It can change the world. It can change us. It can change me. And it's an ongoing process. In conclusion, the context, Jesus spoke these words to his disciples during the Last Supper, just before his crucifixion. The command was he gave them a new commandment, to love one another as he loved them. The evidence, and that's most important, the fruit of what you say you believe and what you say you do. The evidence that's highlighted in this verse, that love is how the world will recognize who his followers are, or whatever tradition you're in. I'll go back to that again. Regardless to your traditions, it's not what you say, it's what you do. What you say can be very important. The nature of love. This love is just not ordinary affection or physical. It can be emotional, but selfless, sacrificial. Love that mirrors Christ or other traditions, Buddha or what the other traditions are, for humanity according to the holy books in each of these traditions. Countercultural. In the context of Jesus' time, this kind of love was revolutionary and went against the norms of the society. So again, it's important, not so much because somebody says it, but when you can show people love. Just think about animals. Animals can respond. They feel that energy when somebody's showing them love. I have a little King Charles Cavalier. She is spoiled rotten, boy, I tell you. But she recognized when I'm stern, and she also recognizes when I say, come here, baby, you know, you're all right. And that little tail starts wagging and things of that regard. But, you know, any species on different levels can understand when there's positive energy being directed toward their lives. What I would encourage myself first is be what you say. Be the salt that you want to see in others. Starts with me. Yeah, I'm up here talking to you, but I always point the head. What do you say when you're pointing a finger at one person? You have four pointing back at yourself. be what you say, practice what you preach. So again, I want to thank all of you for this opportunity. It was such a warm, I was greeted so warmly by various people. We got into all kinds of different conversations, and it was just really holistic for me to be here. Even though I'm speaking, it really meant a lot to me. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Continue the work, and I'm hopeful that I'll come back again. God bless you all.